Welcome to the South Star Classroom. See how quickly that happened? We were just here and we are back. I am Jubilee. That's David. That's Omar. Let's do some check-ins before we hop into today's topic. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing good. I got my second round of COVID, so I actually have COVID right now.
Oh,
Oh shoot.
I'm going to spread it to you through the TV.
please no.
But it's been pretty mild. And so I'm definitely on the mend. It was like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and now I'm on the mend. So I took 12 boosters and it still didn't do anything. So what are you going to do? Other than that, everything's good. We have a 3-week winter break at my son's school district, so we're actually done this Friday. So we're kind of hitting that. We're hitting the holidays a little bit early, so looking forward to some downtime and some exciting work happening with some of my current clients, and also got some new clients on the horizon. So work seems to be really picking up, and I'm cranking away. So yeah, that's how it's going. Thank you.
Of course. Omar, what's going on with you?
I mean, we are headed into the holiday season next week. So this is our last week. So it's just, from the Texas Education Agency to, every contracted group we work with, to our schools, to data. I mean, everything is just getting crunched into this week. So it is an overwhelming week because by next week, we're off and we have 3 weeks off. Which is excellent.
Yeah.
Try to be as thoughtful in terms of giving teachers and kids an adequate amount of time off. It is helpful. So it's crazy right now, just in terms of the amount of work. But it's all the lights at the end of the tunnel. How are you feeling, Jubilee?
I am okay. Today just kind of like whisked by. I walked over 5 miles today.
Wow.
And,
Nice.
I know I've had this sort of wind of energy pickup over the last, like, I'd say maybe month and a half. And so I declared that I would do like my daily 5 is something I committed to.
You do declare.
I do declare. So it's like I gotta sing every day. I have to work out every day in some form. It's either dance or like traditional workout or a walk with or without my dog. Yep. And so today's walk, I just felt the wind. There was like the sun was out and it wasn't dreary and gray. And so I'm always driving. So it just was an opportunity for me to kind of absorb some vitamin D and then also get familiar with my surroundings since I'm never really walking. And so, so it was great. It was a great day. I feel energetic and I'm happy about the holiday season. I'm getting ready to go to Aruba on Saturday with my mom. We have a mommy and me holiday trip, So anyway, so all is well in the world.
Yes. Great.
Wow.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, let's hop into today's lovely topic, Pledge of Allegiance, an act of patriotism or daily indoctrination. What a setup.
Total setup.
Yeah. So some background, right? So Pledge of Allegiance, right? It's the original Bellamy salute, first described in 1892 by Francis Bellamy, who authored this pledge. It was really a military salute. Interestingly enough, the hand was extended like that. Of course, they ended up changing it because it was too close to the Nazi salute. But that is how it started before we used to put our hand over our heart. I won't even go through the words, right? But it was published in the Youth's Companion in 1892, and it did enter into the schools, around that time as well. And they had this whole like sort of a way of doing it that you had to stand, and if you had on any religious or non-religious headdress, you had to take that off and hands to your side, and there was this whole thing around it. And then fast forward to the Supreme Court in 1942 came West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, which was basically this dude, Walter Barnett, who was a Jehovah's Witness, who's like, yo, we don't believe in this stuff. We're not going to be saluting the flag, and we're Jehovah's Witnesses, and this is not something that we want to do. And the problem was that the Pledge of Allegiance had been established as a regular part of program activities in public schools. And so in 1942, the Supreme Court decided, or they ruled in Barnett's favor, 6-3, that, you know, he wouldn't have to do that, or people wouldn't have to do that. Also around that time, there was a flag code established by FDR, and that established the rules for the display and the care of the flag, and included the pledge as well. Right, so that's the background, right? And now we fast forward. In between, where I'm fast forwarding to, are tons of debates, that some that made it to the Supreme Court, some that didn't, some that the Supreme Court listened to, some appeals that made it, some that didn't, right? But modern day, right, up until this year, we're still having issues around the Pledge of Allegiance as it relates to schools and how it should be handled in schools. So in February of this year, the Arizona House of Representatives voted to require public school students to recite the pledge every morning. I mean, the problem is, it has already been established that that is unconstitutional to have to do so. That doesn't stop schools from pushing this, in their opinion, patriotic. Right, so the Supreme Court resolved this issue 80 years ago, right, in the West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, the case that I just mentioned. And so the court held that requiring public school students to pledge allegiance to the flag violates their First Amendment rights, right, against compelled speech. Right, that still didn't stop Arizona from doing that. Another example from this year, right, issues with the Pledge of Allegiance and compelled speech in schools, is Marissa Barnwell, the 9th grade student at Bluff High School. Her parents ended up having to get a lawyer there in Columbia, South Carolina. So on March 9th, 2023, they filed a lawsuit because Marissa was walking down the hallway during the pledge. She says she was walking quietly down the hallway when she was accosted by a teacher who yelled at her and confronted her and pushed her against the wall because she refused to say it, asking her, "Do you not love your country?" And so there's a current lawsuit against that school, that district, that principal. I did research to see if there were any updates yet, but there have not been any updates. But it is around her First Amendment rights being violated. And as of right now, the school and the district have done their own investigation. And the department, they haven't filed any charges against the teacher. And no party has received any sort of discipline. And that is the statement that they released from the lawyer from that district in Columbia, South Carolina. So with that being said, what are your initial thoughts about the Pledge of Allegiance in schools?
Ooh. Before I jump into that, I want to make sure that as we have viewers come in and out of the broadcast, make sure that you chime in as well with your comments. It's always helpful. Omar, you want to take a first crack at it, or would you like me to go?
Go for it, dude.
Okay. I mean, I think to start off with, I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So we're talking about two things. We're talking about the First Amendment issue, right, around compelled speech, right? And then we are also talking about the Establishment Clause, right? So those are kind of the two legal angles where one could potentially challenge being forced or coerced to say the pledge, even in a public school, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
I mean, there's a whole other like political piece that we'll get to, but okay. So then I will just say quickly, I attended public schools, and I don't think we did it in high school, but I know in elementary and middle school we definitely did. the school that my son attends, I asked him this morning. I had a little conversation with them, a little survey, and they do it at his school. They broadcast it, right? They have like a central broadcasting system, so everybody's doing it at the same time. I said, "Do they force you to do it?" He says, "No. Some kids sit down." Who are those kids? Mainly the Arabic kids, and so there's that. And then as a former principal, we never did the pledge, but I'm not sure I would have been opposed to it. Um, so I'm kind of like I'm going either way. I have not quite yet made up my mind, but I think we'll get into some murkier waters as we go forward.
Sure. Thank you for that. Omar, what are your initial thoughts?
I come from a really weird angle here, but I kind of want to go into two different directions. The first is like my own personal direction, which is like I don't like feeling compelled to do anything. So like you tell me like you are compelled to do this, the first thing I'm going to do is rebut, especially just me and my personality as a kid. Like I didn't, even as a child, it's like this Pledge of Allegiance is for what? This sounds like brainwashing. This sounds like I grew up in the Reagan years. As a child, I couldn't stand Reagan. As an adult, he is the epitome of racism, bigotry, the perpetuation of segregation. I mean, I think I've voiced my opinions on Reagan, and I don't think that man deserves a presidential library. I don't believe that Barack Obama did anything but basically service the Republican Party by quoting Reagan and getting himself some votes, which was probably a smart move, but ultimately like a very interesting move because he was instrumental in ensuring the resegregation of Blacks and Latino folks, basically through criminalizing drugs. And by the way, just a quick added note, they have done conclusive evidence to determine that Nancy Reagan's dumbass, stupid ass, bullshit ass, just say no campaign was an abysmal failure, as is Reagan, as is Nancy Reagan. I mean, name one thing that Ronald Reagan did that was great. And people are like, the economy. And it's like, that was the greatest recession since the Great Depression. So this is just some, like, in my opinion, a very like interesting indoctrination. Americana, we're going to like essentially copy Nazi tactics, which by the way, the United States has done. The United States has learned a lot from the Nazis, and we have copied certain thoughts and ideologies. And I think when I taught, I was very expressive to my students that this is a choice. You can put your hand on your heart. You can say it. You can not. You can sit. You can do whatever it is. I am not going to penalize anybody based on what their feelings are over the pledge. Mm-hmm. Now, I am a student of history. So whereas I feel this way, I think back to like, what was the original intention of this? And what was the timing? And why did it matter? And I think if you think back to like World War II days, and if I was a World War II veteran and I was like, hey, man, I just went and fought Mussolini and the Italians and the Nazis and the Japanese, as my grandfather did, and I put my life at risk so that you would be in a better place. So Nazis did not control the world, and you can't get up one time a day at school to just say, hey, thank you. I'd probably be pissed. I'd be pissed. And El Paso is a very military town. Fort Bliss is, I think, one of the largest, if not the largest, military bases in the country at this point. It's huge. So there's a certain level of respect for our military. But like, I think personally, I would rather do something to the tune like, hey, we're going to take a minute of your day just to give thanks. You can give thanks to America. You can give thanks to the troops who have fought in our wars. You can give thanks to your mom. You can give thanks to whatever deity you believe in. But I would rather an open opportunity where every kid could have a minute of just silent gratitude that could be inclusive versus just parroting out a pledge at this point, which feels more compulsory and less with heart. And if the goal is to have heart, then like, is this the right mechanism to do it? Because it seems weird. I mean, I've got a lot more to say about it, but those are just my initial hot takes.
For sure. I mean, so the word loyalty comes to mind, right? Like, I think that's part of it, right? Being able to express your loyalty to your country, you know. But I think like when these things come down the pike, though, they usually, especially for kids, there's like no explanation along with it, right? It's kind of like this is just what we do, you know. It's just like the do as I say, you know, just do as I say, not as I do. And so there's almost this this expectation of blindness around it, where it's like just respect your country and stand up and salute the flag and sing the Star Spangled Banner. Like, what's your problem? You know? And it's like, well, you know, this is one of those formalities, it's one of those ceremonial pieces that we just think about it. You have kindergartners, and we get so happy when they stand and salute the pledge and they fumble over all their little cute words and say it, right? But when do we get to the point where we actually, if we're talking about loyalty, right, so begin to explain and help children understand the country they live in and those dynamics, that they can make an informed choice, right? And who knows, maybe with that information they might want to say the pledge. But the idea of, you know, just being responsible for just standing up and saying the pledge and being proud of something that you don't understand or may not have landed for you and your family in that way, that makes you want to be loyal, that makes you proud of where you are, I think is a bit unfair.
So I accidentally sent a text message to my sister, I think yesterday when we were kind of prepping for the show, and she's like, "What are you guys talking about on your podcast tomorrow?" I said, "The Pledge of Allegiance." And my sister is she's a school administrator, classroom teacher. She's been in education for probably over 30 years, right? Still is today. And so she, you know, I kind of explained it to her. We had a little back and forth, and she says, "It's so sad that we start our day saying a pledge and perhaps brainwashing our youngest students to believe in the Pledge of Allegiance. And when you teach kids of color, they're the ones that will most likely not be represented or treated equitably in this country." Right? I was like, you nailed it. You know, but I also, you know, me also, like what Omar was saying, you know, I grew up in a different time. I also have family that were veterans and that have a different view on it. That, you know, came to this country from Mexico and had a very pronounced, like, different way of life, much better, right? And so I think it's a very complex issue. But I do think as a former history teacher, it's absolutely an opportune, like, moment to, especially with what's happening now in the world, right? Like, what does the USA even, like, represent, right? It's so dynamic. There's so much change.
Yeah, that's a great question.
You know, we're kind of involved in, like, there's two wars happening right now, right? And we're becoming a much more divided country. And in theory, the pledge is that thing that's supposed to bring us together, right? Like, I love going to a baseball game and, like, standing up and doing the pledge. You know, you got a beer and you're about to watch baseball, and everybody's good for that moment, right? You're like, what if it could always be like this? But, you know, the reality is, like, it's not, right? And we know what the conditions are for too many people that are furthest away from opportunity. So I think, you know, definitely an opportunity for teachers and schools to dig deeper into, like, what it really means. And if you believe it, then you believe it, and nobody can take that away from you. And if you question it, you have every right as an American to question the words of the pledge, right? That's what our country was, like, founded upon, right? There was no pledge before. The pledge was created, you know, based on, you know, the creation of a brand new country, a new nation, right? That has a very, like, checkered and bloodied past that we still have yet to reckon with. So, I mean, yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming at it from. I just think even outside of the pledge, like what does the flag represent to people? I think the idea or the concept of what it means to be, even in American, right, from the United States of America, is if you ask 20 people on the street, they're going to give you 20 different answers, right? And we've talked about this, and a lot of that starts in our schools because we have not yet figured out what it is, right? And so everybody's kind of all over the map. And if you were in a school in Florida versus Texas versus Washington State, Michigan, New York, San Diego, wherever, the curriculum is going to look different, the civics curriculum, and it's going to be taught in a different way, right? And so I think we definitely have a lot of work to do. But I don't think we should, like this Arizona thing that you raised up. I had to read it. All the crazy stuff comes through Arizona. So just follow the Arizona news, right? They're always trying to do they're like the first, we're going to try this crazy legislation. And if it sticks, other people will do it. But the idea of like forcing people to say the pledge is a non-starter for me, especially because then you're creating what could be considered a hostile environment for children that like don't want to say it, and they come from backgrounds where it's just not how they identify, right? And that's not what we stand for.
Yeah, and it's like either we're a democratic nation or we're not. Like either we have free speech or we don't. You know, I feel like a democratic society with a side of communism, like habits, or communist habits. It's interesting. But I want to acknowledge what Alonzo said. As a kid, I remember being told, "You're in America, show some respect or go back to Mexico."
Yeah,
absolutely.
David was saying a ton of things that kind of hit home for me. And, I will say this, like, I've been to a Boston Red Sox game, and it's both cool to me to hear everybody singing Sweet Caroline in unison because that's the song they play during the 7th inning stretch. But again, personal, like, it freaks me out a little bit to have like, dude, everyone's standing up like robots. Everyone's like, I pledge of allegiance to the flag. And it freaks me out, man. I'm like, what the hell kind of like Terminator 2 shit is this, dude? Like, are you robots gonna come and murder me? You're gonna like grab the flag and just joust me, dude, like medieval knights and be like, have at you, and just stick me with your flag because like patriotism, right? Which I want to get into really quick because like if you haven't had the chance, this is something I've always had an animate belief about, but I think that there was a book that did a kind of a good job of thinking through this. So like there's the 4 agreements, which I think Castillo, you've read for sure. Jubilee, I don't know if you've heard of it. I'm making it like a reading for everybody here. That's funny, dude. The funny part is I'm from Kansas. Yeah, that's badass, dude. And I feel you because like for me growing up, I was like, hey, I've got some issues. They're like, if you don't like America, you can get out. And I'm like, bro, is America your identity? Because that's fucked up, dude. Like I don't need your identity to be your soccer team. I don't need your identity to be like, I like The Office. Like, oh God, The Office. And that's what I'm getting at. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you got my brain going because I think like there's assumptions around like people who don't want to say the pledge or don't feel comfortable saying whatever it is. Like you're not patriotic, you're not loyal, you don't care about your country. And it's like, it's interesting because if you dig back, right, to this young lady, I don't know her family, the one that's from Columbia, South Carolina, right? But if you dig back into a lot of people's history that are on this soil, you'll probably find someone who was in the military. Some Black person was in the military where they may or may not have been treated well, right? But the loyalty that they had for their country, whatever their reason was for joining, they were on somebody's front line somewhere fighting on behalf of the United States of America. But sometimes it's looked upon as like you're just a misfit. You don't care about the country. It's like, no, like I actually love where I live. I just don't love how my country shows up in these areas, right? And it's like, how do can you still be, loyal and truthful?
Right.
Is that an interesting combination?
And that doesn't mean, I mean, this is where people, this is where, like, especially in this moment, we're like, oh, you're unpatriotic, or you don't love this country. I'm like, the only reason we have the United States of America is because people like fled England, right? Because they didn't like it there, right?
Well,
And
I'm gonna get into that in a second.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but the whole idea is like, that actually leads to, that's the healthy discourse, right? You can, be like, here's where I live, this is my country, and you can, an act of showing love for your country, um, can look like pushing back on the status or the health of your country, because right now it is clearly sick, right? And we can and we should be pushing back and challenging any number of things that are happening now in the U.S., because we care about it, right? And if you didn't care about it, well, then maybe we leave. But I don't think any of us are going anywhere. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, that whole I grew up on like, if you don't like America, you can get out. And like South Park makes fun of it, right? Like, Stan's dad, Randy, is getting into full-blown fist fights with his shirt off and his pants are down, and you can see his tiny whities, but his pants are like around his ankles, and he's getting tossed into a cop car. He's like, I thought this was America. I thought this was America. And he's like getting into fist fights at like little league games. And I think that's like therein becomes something that I'm like worried about, because here's the juxtaposition for our audience, right? Here's like this like opposites, this dichotomy is like, people are like, oh boy, that's un-American. I'm like, bro, read a book, bro. Like, if you actually read anything, I've read every word to the constitutional debate. I've read every word to the Anti-Federalist Papers and the Federalist Papers. I've read everything that Thomas Paine wrote. I've read by the way, Thomas Paine's Common Sense was at the time, and up until like even recently, the most circulated book and pamphlet in American history. And this thing is about revolt. This thing is about, you've got to speak your mind. If things are not okay, you've got to be able to like talk about it. Even Madison and Hamilton in the Federalist Papers are like, dude, you can't just acquiesce to the majority. There's a minority that needs to speak up. And if the minority is getting out of control, like, yo, man, like, it's up to people to say, this is not okay. It's embedded into the First Amendment and free speech. So to persecute that free speech, I think, is the most un-American thing. For someone to be like, you got to stand up and say this shit. I'm like, bro, that's the most unpatriotic thing that you could say. If I choose to do so, that is because I'm being given the liberty, the very liberty you guys went out and fought for. I now get to exercise, but now you are saying that I don't have the liberty. I got to sound like some fucking drone and sit here and like listen in as I hear the mindless masses use the American flag as their own cape in their own pursuit for whatever bullshit justice that they're pursuing. Think about the ramifications of that for kids. Are we, like, you got into the question of like, is this indoctrination? Like, that's indoctrination. You're not giving a choice.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
And by persecuting others, you're no longer giving a choice. What you're doing is saying, like, this is who we are. And I'm like, no, that's who you are. I choose to celebrate America in a very, very different way. And if you don't like want to buy in on that, cool. But like, I'll get into this later, because why we do the things we do in America is fascinating. And people are like, well, it's always been done this way. I'm like, do you know why? Because
Right.
I'll get into that. But I mean, I could see both of you kind of being like, oh, okay, like, I agree in terms of my choice and Americans choosing to use this identity thing. And really quickly, just to kind of tail end this, the book is called The Fifth Agreement. So it's it's written by the son of the author of the Four Agreements. So Don Miguel Ruiz wrote the Four Agreements. Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. wrote the Fifth Agreement. And it's a really cool look into like, hey man, like, why is your identity your soccer team? Why is your livelihood the Dallas Cowboys? Yo, I was just again quickly. I was on a plane back from Philadelphia. All right, this past Saturday. Philadelphia fans, the Eagles fans, are a very interesting group.
Oh my
folks.
goodness.
God dang, man. They are
They're
I
very
just had on my
rowdy.
Philadelphia Eagles hoodie earlier.
rowdy as hell, bro.
Rowdy, yeah.
And I mean, they're on a plane to go to Dallas, to go to the Dallas Cowboys game. And on the plane, I mean, just talking shit. And like, dude, I never heard
Terrible.
chants on
Terrible.
a plane. They're like, E-A-G-L-E-S. Eagles. Like on the plane, bro. And it was like, yeah, go Birds, go Birds, go Birds. I'm cracking up. Because, like, I'm not going to judge that. I'm not going to say that's dumb. I'm cracking up because, like, yo, that's funny. Like, you guys want to celebrate your team in America and all the things and talk shit about the Cowboys. Like, cool. That is your God-given right to do so, and I'm going to celebrate that God-given right. I just happen to be somebody in the periphery here. But what I found to be funny is that it's their identity. So my first question is like, what the hell y'all doing after these like 10, maybe 12 weeks of the year? Are you sad? Are you just like, do you feel that way about the Phillies? Like,
and how was that plane ride back after they got whooped by the Cowboys?
Yeah, dude, that must have
Demolished.
not been like the best plane ride because, bro, they were talking so much shit. They got off the plane and they were talking shit. They're like, yeah, we'll see you when you guys win 10 games. And then just got bashed. But this is the thing. Their happiness and their sadness, their livelihood, their identity is so mixed into something they have absolutely no control of, which is this team. So the pledge for me is ideological. It's not ideological. It's symbolic. It's metaphoric of your identity is so much about being this American. And you're basing your opinion, not your opinion, your identity on something that you have absolutely no control over. And then do you know where this came from? Because if you did, I wonder if you would feel the exact same way. So right. I'm dominating the conversation, so I got to be quiet for a minute. But I kind of want to give you guys that pot to stir around a little bit in terms of like, is this something that is maybe done on purpose? Is this kind of like the group think that people want us to have, where we're not questioning our country or questioning, the things? Because I feel like you can simultaneously question America and love America.
That's where I am, David.
Yeah, I think you manufactured like distraction, right? And I think a lot of this ties back to, who said it? Malcolm X, right? Knowledge is power, right? Mm-hmm. And whether you learn in a college, or you learn on your own. If you are a learned person, right? If you study history, if you study current events, if you study philosophy, if you study, sociology to any extent, economics, it provides you with the tools to understand why the world is the way that it is. So you are more or less likely to kind of throw all of your eggs into, one basket and just kind of, go with the flow wherever it takes you. If it takes you on a plane from Philadelphia to Dallas to lose a football game, and then for the rest of the year you're kind of depressed. But I think it's critical thinking. It's the same thing. And so with the Pledge of Allegiance, like connecting. So if you think about the words to the pledge, liberty, freedom, all these like catchwords, right? It's much more palatable to read and to believe if you choose to ignore, or maybe not even actively choose to ignore, but if you just don't really understand the true history of how the United States became the United States, right? What Alonso is saying about, like start by looking at what happened with the indigenous people that were here, right, before anyone else, and then look at what happened as a result of slavery, and then look at what happened as a result of the United States acquiring, a huge chunk of land as a result of a war it fought with Mexico, and what happened to what was life like for Mexicans living all of a sudden one day in Mexico and then the next day in the U.S., right?
Yeah.
All of those things. I mean, look at what happened to the Southern European and Irish immigrants that came through Ellis Island, and look at what happened to the Chinese that came in from the West and how they were treated. Like we have a very dynamic and a very, an incredibly like racist and also very dynamic history, right? And if you can understand those things, and you want to sing the pledge, and you still feel like you can hold on to those ideals that they're somewhere, then do it. But my issue is, like, especially in this moment when they're trying to wipe out textbooks from schools and particular types of curriculum and DEI programs, right? They're trying to silence any conversation right now around racism in the United States of America. And an interesting example was recently, Kevin McCarthy, who apparently is going to be leaving his post. He was at an event the other day. He was talking about how great our country is, right? And talking about how in every single war that America has fought, we have never asked for land afterwards, except for enough to bury the Americans who gave the ultimate sacrifice for freedom. Okay, good line. He was corrected by Community Notes on Twitter, and I corrected him as well. I'm like, are you talking about the Louisiana Purchase? Are you talking about Florida? Are you talking about the Mexican Cession? Are you talking about the Gadsden Purchase? Are you talking about Alaska? Are you talking about Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, Philippines, American Samoa, Virgin Islands? So point being, it's like it's much easier to brainwash and indoctrinate people if they don't have a clear understanding of our shared history, right? And that's we're talking about the pledge, but the bigger issue is continuing to talk about the need to have these very real and at times very challenging conversations. I've had them, I've lived them, we've all lived them, right? And it's like people just want to turn the corner and say, okay, we're just going to look forward now. We can't change what happened in the past, but we sure can repeat it if we don't understand what happened in the past.
Sure. Yeah, I think there needs to be a level of willingness, and I think it could be a statement of hope, right? Like indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we've been saying that for decades, and we still haven't seen liberty and justice for all. I've been called a nigger in my own country in 6th grade, walking home and asking, Italian Americans about their dog, and I was called a nigger in my country. This didn't happen. I backpacked through Europe in college. They might have looked at me and asked me what I was doing there as a young Black woman, but nobody called me a nigger. I got called a nigger in these here United States of America. Back in October, I went, my bonus mom, she turned 60, drove from Maryland to South Carolina. My GPS thought it was trying to save me some time and had me drive down a 24-mile road laced with American flags and Confederate flags. And I had no idea because I'm not familiar with the area. When I got to my uncle's house, he said, "You went down what road?" He said, "We don't drive down that road." He said, "And if I ever get caught on that road, I always keep my hand on my gun." He said, because I never know if some kind of redneck or somebody's going to run out there. He said, and they born and raised in South Carolina, but there are certain places as Black people, they do not drive. In 2023, and he was in the military, So I just think like if there's a willingness to have this conversation, I think we could get much further, and then possibly the Pledge of Allegiance could become true. I think we've had a lot of hope surrounding what it means, what it could mean, what it could become. But hope deferred makes the heart sick, and I think we've seen enough letdowns and enough disproportionality and enough mistreatment where it's like, wait, why are we pledging allegiance, to this flag, to this country, that has is filled with so much hurt and harm. And lastly, I'll say, like, I think another conversation could be around what does it really mean to be patriotic, right? I do think you can be patriotic and have loyalty and truth, and ask questions and have real conversations, because you'll have people standing up, pledging allegiance and all that, but you lie on your taxes, bro. You steal money from the government every single year, but you're so patriotic. Like, you will say sing the Star Spangled Banner aisle 3 and Pledge of Allegiance at aisle 7, but you lie on your taxes every single year. Is that patriotic? Right? Like, when the government is not able to get, the money that goes towards supporting local school districts or paving the streets or whatever, like, is that patriotic? Like, what even is patriotism? And does it go deeper than the Pledge of Allegiance? Those are my thoughts.
So, like, in hearing all that, I've got a couple things to chime in. It's like, it goes back a little bit to, like, why are we doing the things that we did? And thinking back to the history of this pledge and coming during World War II, and the feeling of patriotism and the feeling of, like, we don't want this to happen again. We just had 2 world wars where, like, the Austrian Hungarians were trying to dominate the world in the first one, and then, like, the Germans trying to dominate the world in the second one. And this is, like, about world dominance. So, I give it to folks during that time, if they're saying, like, hey, Jesus, like, how do we instill a sense of patriotism about our ideals? Because you start looking now into the future, and, like, democracy is a threat right now, because people, the things that created democracy in this country are fragile. They're just ideas, right? It was basically, a lot of it came from the French, ironically. So, like, for those of you in our audience are like, where the hell do we get all these ideals from? Where did Thomas Jefferson get his stuff from? And Ben Franklin and Madison? Mostly the French. A guy named Montesquieu, who wrote a book called The Spirit of Laws, which is what the overwhelming majority of our, like, constitution and ideologies are based on. British common laws, and going back to even things like the Magna Carta is what they're based on. But I'll give you, like, a funny example, right? So if you look at a dollar bill these days, you'll notice all kinds of funny things, like, especially if you're on weed, someone, like, hanging out in those bushes, someone going to jump out. What's with that all-seeing eye? David knows what I'm talking about. But it says on the bottom, like, in God we trust, right? And much like the pledge, it's like, why is that there? And people are like, well, this is a God-fearing country. And I'm like, no. The history of in God we trust on our currency dates back just to the Civil War. First off, like, paper bills were, like, not a thing. It was mostly coins, right? Like, a $1 bill was a huge deal in the 1800s, right? Least of all, something like a $5 bill. The reason that they put in God we trust is because during the Civil War in, like, 1862, when we were not doing very well and the Confederacy looked like they may win this thing, which they were very close to winning this thing, by the way. That's something that history does not teach. The Union had a flurry of huge issues. They went through several generals. It did not look good. Ulysses S. Grant was, like, a interesting guy, also, like, a fervent alcoholic. Graduated almost last in his class at West Point. The Union needed something to pep their spirit, to be like, you're fighting this war for a good reason, because I think that their spirits were incredibly down. And it was a reverend at the time who was like, what if they thought they were fighting, much like Joan of Arc, talked about how this is a war and a battle for good, led by God itself. What if our troops just believe that this is divine, that God is on our side? And they were like, well, how do we communicate that? So they put in God we trust on our bills, not because we are a God-fearing country, like many people will believe, because they don't know our history, but because it was used as a morale booster, right? And that is now since gone. So the interpretation of what in God we trust on the bill is gone to history, because most people don't know that one fact. I would arguably say that the pledge needs an update, or the pledge needs some level of like discussion or talk or a circle to kind of like get at the understanding, because the pledge is not explained at all. It's just like you're either patriotic or not. And that kind of like divide is also not American and unhealthy.
For sure.
Like, and for all the patriots out there, it's like you're either with us or you're not. I'm like, chill out.
So I want to share this quote.
And by the way, like who are we? Like, if you're a troop, that's one thing. If you're some like paramilitary asshole who's like 500 pounds and like hanging out at like academy on the weekend, buying like ammunition and like flying your Confederate flag, like, bro, like, I'm not with you. I'm not. So you could say the pledge all you want. I'm going to celebrate America in the way I want to, and that is what the First Amendment affords me. And I think the founding fathers know a hell of a lot more than your like, Confederate flag toting ass.
I want to segue, thank you for that, to this quote. So the Supreme Court explained, right, to believe that patriotism will not flourish if patriotic ceremonies are voluntary and spontaneous instead of a compulsory routine is to make an unflattering estimate of the appeal of our institutions to free minds. Thoughts?
Can you read it one more time?
Sure.
Sorry.
To believe that patriotism,
I was just about to say the same thing. I need to like process it.
Yeah, to believe that patriotism will not flourish if patriotic ceremonies are voluntary and spontaneous instead of a compulsory routine is to make an unflattering estimate of the appeal of our institutions to free minds. Supreme Court.
Which justice said that? If you don't mind me asking. I love the quote.
I'm gonna have to find it.
I mean, I think the quote is it was probably written in an opinion where they were pushing back on having to make a decision, right?
Yes.
So they're just like, back to you. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's an appropriate quote for a Supreme Court argument where they're pushing off on making a decision. But I think it depends. It's like that last part, right? Like, what is it that we're selling? What is it that we were expected as Americans to buy, right? I think forcing people to do something, that they don't believe in, of course, is not going to lead to, the kind of outcome that we want. I think outside of I'll let Omar go, but I have something else to say going back about God.
Gotcha. Yeah, I pulled that from this is the Supreme Court opinion connected to that 1942 West Virginia State Board of Education and rethinking schools.
Look, I think humans are a rebellious sort. You tell us to do something and we're going to get pissed no matter what race, nationality, country, or nation, right? To do things out of necessity and compulsion, I think, strips away from the very essence of what America's ideologies were founded on. This is a country that is supposed to celebrate choice. It is supposed to celebrate the freedom of ideologies. It is supposed to celebrate sharing those ideologies without judgment and persecution. So it's like it's an ironic thing to force something that is so counter to the very foundations of America. And I think that's just why the Supreme Court struck down the compulsory saying of the pledge, because whether you're, conservative or liberal on the court, and the conservatives being like, we are going to take what the founding fathers did quite literally, and we're basing it on the Federalist Papers, and we're basing it on like what the founding fathers would say today, or the liberal interpretation, which is like America was founded in 1776 technically, but it existed well before then, in terms of the spirit of independence over here, radically different times. So we're kind of trying to interpret these readings and what would be appropriate today. You take either one of those ways that the Supreme Court judges things, and you're still going to come up with the founding fathers would not be celebrating the compulsory saying of anything.
Right.
Period. And so I think that you say that quote, and I agree with it, regardless of which judge said it, because I think both a conservative and a liberal judge would go back and be like, yeah, dude, I don't think the founding fathers were necessarily down with this.
Right.
And it's as simple as that.
I mean, they believed in, so this is exactly my point. Our founding fathers envisioned a more, a society that was like religiously pluralistic, right? Where people could, worship as they saw fit, right? To feel safe to do that in their own communities. And somehow we've gone back to this assumption, and we've talked about it with, I think, the like the religious charter school issue. We're talking about it now. I think the what's the Mike Johnson, right? He's the new speaker, right? So he made a comment the other day at a gathering of Christian nationalist lawmakers, right? A couple of weeks ago. He said that he had a dream, right? He had a vision that Jesus had spoken to him, or God had spoken to him, and told him that he was to play the role of Moses, right, leading the GOP conference and America through the parted waters of the Red Sea, right? I mean, clearly, like a Christian angle there, right? And I'm like, you're the leader, the Speaker of the House, and we continuously see this alignment with our government, our public systems, our democracy, and Christianity, right? It's like it's one nation under God. We know what God. I mean, regardless of how it got there in the pledge, right? It's still, we can assume they ain't talking about Buddha, right? They're talking about the Christian God, right? And so, that's also my larger concern, because there's an underlying. It's not even an assumption. It's like that's what they're talking about, right? And whether you're a Christian or a Catholic or whatever you practice, I feel like it's a slippery slope to go down. And once we go down too far, life in this country is going to be hard for people that choose to not practice that particular religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually why a lot of people come to this country, right? Where I live, there are immigrants from all over the world that came here because they were persecuted in their home countries as a result of the religion that they practice. So what happens when we start doing that here to non-Christian people, right? By forcing their children to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and you don't want to say it, right?
For sure. I mean, back to the example of Marissa Barnwell, right? A child's hero, right? Because what happens when you're not able to separate that from professionalism, right? Like homeboy crossed the line because a student was like, I'm not saying that. And it's like, yeah, you're the teacher. So you're supposed to know that what you're doing is unconstitutional and denying her First Amendment rights. But your patriotism and your loyalty to your country has caused you to violate and disrespect the least of them, right? As the Bible would say, right? The precious ones. Mm-hmm. So now it's 6:56. So we're in final thoughts. Look at that. But let me just share before we go into final thoughts. The idea for this episode came about because I was in a school a couple weeks ago, and they said the Pledge of Allegiance, and like I couldn't remember the last time I heard this. I said, "Oh my God!" I felt so strange, and then I looked around the room, and there were some that stood, right. Some of the adults in the office stood and said it proudly, and then there were people of color who stood out of respect but didn't say a word. And then there was me that was like, I pledge allegiance to the flag. And I was like, wait, I haven't done this in so long. Like, what the heck?
Yeah.
I just feel like I got thrown into like a bit of a Pledge of Allegiance whirlwind, right? And so my question as we do our final thoughts is like, so what does this look like moving forward, right? For Black and brown kids, right, that are in school, right? Some who may feel fine with saying it out of not understanding, like Omar was saying, how our country came to be, right? Not necessarily having any qualms with it because, hey, it's just me saluting and showing respect to my country. And then you have other Black and brown students that have different experiences, right? Different perspectives on our country. So where do we stand now? What does this look like in the next 5 years, the next 10 years?
It's a good question.
I'll give it a shot. I mean, I think I don't think, like, I firmly stand against any. And real quick, Alonzo, thank you for the comments during the show. You're spot on. Thank you for contributing. We really appreciate that. I think I don't stand for any kind of mandate, right? That's like, to me, that feels very un-American, right? At the same time, like I said at the beginning, I do find, there's some place like deep in my heart, like, again, maybe it's because of the baseball experience or something where I'm like, hey, yeah, we're all together in this thing right now, right? I think there can be a common thread that brings us all together, regardless of your background, regardless of your socioeconomic status, your education level, where you live, how you live. I think that's important, right? I don't think it should be dictated to us by anyone. And then the last thing is, I think we, especially in this time, when for sure, like what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, but we also, have a situation here on our border. We have what's happening in the Middle East, between Israel and Palestine, and now, the larger Arab state is erupting. And to see how people are responding to that in different ways demonstrates to me that we've lost the ability, again, to have a nuanced, educated, grounded conversation, right? People on both sides saying like, we must annihilate Israel off the map, and on the other side, like, everything you say now is anti-Semitic. I'm like, come on, there's a middle ground, and I think we need to take the same approach when we take a critical look at our own ideas of like freedom and democracy and liberty. Like, what does that mean? Like my sister made the comment, yeah, we make the kids say it, but they're the ones that don't get it, right? And so, have that conversation, lean into that. That's what we do here at the podcast. So that's what I got to say. Thank you, Jubilee.
Thank you so much. Omar, final thoughts.
Yeah, I think a huge shout out to Alonzo, man. The show is really badass. I felt like you were part of it. Thank you, because it was fun to have you on the show with all the comments, and kind of want to acknowledge a few of them. And that, like, here's the irony of irony, dude. Like, everyone forgets this. Like, first off, and David talked about it earlier, the people that came into this country that were not the Native Americans, immigrants. Like, how do you think the Native Americans felt about those immigrants?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, like, we celebrate Thanksgiving and we celebrate the coming together. And, like, you've got this, like, ideological stance of, like, now that we're here and no one else can come in, like, you need to chill out. And you also need to understand that, like, you were the first immigrants. These are Puritans. These people were pieces of shit. All right, I said it, and I will say it again. I'll go on CNN and justify the fact that, like, these people were horrible people. They're like, oh, I was on the Mayflower. I'm like, bro, you were on the Mayflower because you got kicked out of England. You were so intolerable. No one liked your ass. Then you went to Amsterdam, the most liberal country in the world, and they didn't even want your ass, and they kicked you out of Amsterdam. So you had to go to a part of the world that you thought was uninhabited because those are the only people that would have you, which is the trees. And even the trees didn't like your ass. So, like, we got to understand the history of this country. Is that, like,
yeah.
These Mayflower people were some of the most intolerant assholes on the face of the planet that no one liked. Is that the America that you represent when you say the pledge? Is that the America that you celebrate? Because that's a celebration of intolerable assholes, hypocrisy, shit, name the book, The Crucible, Scarlet Letter, Easy A, the movie, like Puritan hypocrisy. That is what is what I think America is fighting against. A place where you have the ability to celebrate this country, but at the same time question this country, is the fine line that we establish in America. And we get to question it because we love it enough to want to improve it. And I think when you say a pledge and you say something that becomes involuntary, you're taking away from that freedom rather than exercising the opportunity to do a, hey, like, why are we doing this? But more importantly, what can we be grateful for?
Mm-hmm.
And can we give everybody not only the why in our classrooms and the why in our baseball games, but the opportunity to not face persecution if they choose to think all the things, their family, their loved ones, the troops, the people who fought in the wars for us, our teachers who are in the classrooms taking care of our kids. It shouldn't be a pledge to a flag. I think this should be a pledge to the Americans that we love in the better hope that we can create the America that we wished we lived in.
Boom.
Thank you so much. And that really segues to my point, right? To answer your question, if I were to, pledge allegiance to the flag, I pledge allegiance to the flag that represented what our country looked like when George Floyd died, when he was being murdered by an officer with his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And you almost couldn't find a country that was like, we don't care, right? Across the globe, people were like, this is bullshit. This is unfair, right? This is not liberty and justice for all. That man was innocent. He didn't do a thing but breathe, right? And whatever they said he did, he didn't deserve to die for that. That would be the America that I have no problem standing and saying, you know why? Because this country will call bullshit. This country will say, hey, that is not fair, right? And at that moment in time, across our world, we saw black, we saw white, we saw Latinx, we saw straight, we saw gay, we saw dogs, we saw raccoons, we saw birds, we saw politicians, we saw civilians, we saw everybody like, hey, that officer killed that man for no good reason, and he needs to be held accountable. That is the America that I will stand for. That is the America that I will be loyal to, because it's grounded on morals, right versus wrong, and that to me represents liberty and justice for all. And I'll end with this quote that my good friend Dr. Shara Jackson sent to me, and it's a James Baldwin quote, which says, "I love America more than any other country in this world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." And I think that's what it should look like 5, 10 years. Is let's teach babies how to love their country and also reserve the right to perpetually criticize, right, in love, the United States of America. And that's my final thought. I am Jubilee. That's David. That's Omar. You have tuned in to our classroom. See you next week. Peace.
Peace. We miss you, Cole.